Welcome, everyone. My name is Olga Finneran, and I am your host today. Thank you for joining this Drummond Advisory Services webinar, which will showcase advisory services options related to ONC G10 API and real-world testing requirements. We at Drummond want you to know your attendance is greatly appreciated. This webinar is being recorded, and we will have it available on our website's resources page within the next 24 hours. Our speaker will be taking a few questions at the end of this webinar, so feel free to send your questions via the chat button. Any questions not answered live will be answered via email. It is important to note the services offered by Drummond Advisory Services are separate and distinct from the Drummond Test Lab and certification body. Specific questions about G10 API and real-world testing compliance will be addressed offline. Our speaker today is John Valutkevich. John's 29-year career in healthcare IT draws on experiences with Meditech, Commvault, Berkeley Research Group, and as an independent consultant before joining Drummond in 2019. As Interoperability Program Director, John is responsible for the program management of our CMS Fire testing service, as well as fulfilling a subject matter expert role to the healthcare compliance and advisory services business units. Since 2009, John has been an adjunct faculty member at Endicott College in Beverly, Massachusetts. So let's get started. John, it's all yours.
Thank you, Olga, and welcome everybody to this Drummond Advisory Services presentation, meant to give you an update on the advisory services team and how we've grown and the additional offerings that are now made available to Drummond customers. And again, as we look at Drummond Advisory Services and what is really brought to the table is we've been able to formalize and enhance the services you've come to expect from Drummond as you navigate healthcare IT compliance. That's really the goal of this particular team. It's important to note in terms of familiarity, most of you attendees are probably familiar with when you think of Drummond Group. That is the business unit and organization that you deal with for certification requirements for your EHR solutions. So that's the ONC Health IT Test Lab, the certification body, where you get most of your customer information from the customer portal, all of that. We are a separate group, advisory services, specializing obviously in healthcare compliance. And the topics that we will touch on today and expand on deal with the service offerings that we have around real-world testing, centric to fire implementation as it relates to the ONC requirements and to the CMS interoperability final rule, as well as the pre-testing services that you may have been familiar with that occurred over in the test lab side. We've moved that over to advisory services. Also important to note that these two teams really work hand in hand with the other Drummond teams as it relates to security compliance. So just a note there that's separate from the groups here, but intertwined. And obviously, when you think about healthcare IT compliance, we do have a team that supports HIPAA consulting, as well as from a security side centric to EHR penetration testing. So again, when you think of Drummond, the goal here is to ensure that you think about all of these other business units and opportunities that we might be able to help your organization. All right. From an advisory services perspective, when we think about the value add side of things, we look at ONC and CMS compliance. That's our core competencies. The team members here have over 50 years of experience, whether it be in the throes of EHR implementation, ONC contracting, and some folks that have worked directly for ONC and other ONC test labs in the past. Our familiarity and ability to help you with test tool management, and some authors for some of the test tools that are out there. And then we look at also the value add related to both our customers, providing you the guidance and planning to support your initiatives around EHR and healthcare IT compliance, as well as project plans when implemented limit the effect on your customer base. So with those values in mind, that's really what we bring to the table for advisory services. Let's look at this year. And again, most of you folks are aware that this is the current environment. We've been building towards this since the Cures Act, but this year really is what we're dubbing a convergence of compliance when you think of it from an advisory services. And this is the main areas that I'll speak about today in the webinar about how advisory services may help you out as it relates to everything coming to a head really this year in terms of it's the second year of real world testing, as well as starting a new year. We'll talk more about that in a moment. You now have the looming deadline to ensure that your EHR suite is compliant to the ONC G10 requirements. Concurrent with that, if you interact with or have payer-based or payer support technology solutions, the CMS interoperability rule went into effect last year. Additional requirements and updates are occurring this year with the implementation guides. We have a service offering around that. And then in terms of what you've probably always known, we'll expand on it a little bit more, is general ONC compliance. So that's really what we look at in terms of offering to our customer base. And that is the way in which we will approach the presentation today. So per the order, let's get into real world testing services. And again, just lay out where we are today in time. I feel like it's best to serve as a reminder to map things out as they occur in the calendar year this year and into next. So last year, as you recall, you had to come up with a real world test plan. You had to submit that to the ONC ACB, and your chapel listings were updated for certifications of compliance with those real world test plans. So therefore, this year, you're now implementing those real world test plans and going about deploying them and starting to gather all of your results. That's with an eye towards the ONC ACB needs those real world test report results due by February 1st of 2023 per interim addition to the final rule that your chapel listings will be updated with the results of that test plan married back to your real world test plan by March 15th of 2023. Reminder two, real world testing is an annual requirement. Therefore, while you are deploying and implementing your real world test plan that you wrote last year, you have to think about there is another real world test plan that is due this year. That is due to the ONC ACB here at Drummond by November 1st, so that it aligns with per the final rule. Another real world test plan gets added to your chapel listings by December 15th of this year. Therefore, that would then again trigger the annual cycle of collecting your real world test results for real world test plan year 2. Again, another test plan is due next year, annual requirements, such that you align again with the ONC final rules. This is a perpetual requirement for maintenance of certification as it pertains to real world testing. Just a reminder too, although you'll note that the ONC ACB real world test results report is due as late as February 1st, per the updates that Drummond customers would expect through their portal. I just wanted to put a reminder out there that you'll be able to submit your real world test plan results reports as early as December 1 of this particular year. So again, this is the annual cycle. You do have to add a few more certification requirements to that, and we'll expand on that in a moment. So at current, we're working with a fair amount of customers that some of them carried over. We wrote their real world test plans for them last year, and we're picking up some new customers to help them through what we're calling the test coordination effort as it relates to real world testing. And our goal here is to provide that expert guidance throughout the life cycle of your real world test plan deployment project. So we're providing a fair amount of templates and testing guidance and project management plans that actually get into the recommended steps for testing up to 25 criteria and the type of data that we delve into this. Really want to get down to brass tacks and understand and look at your test plan and help you deploy what we're really calling two separate data choices, summative assessments and interactive testing, as the final rule mentions that your goal for real world testing is to have traceability from your real world test plan to your real world test results reports. That comes with a full-fledged interactive, collaborative, dynamic access to Monday board for complete project management throughout this life cycle of test coordination. That's all leading towards Drummond's other portion of real world testing as it relates to what goes on last year is to work with you to prepare that final results report. Reviewing your test results and evidence from both that functional and summative testing. Obviously, we'll disclaimer there, we make all real world test plans and coordination efforts are tied together to ensure that there's limited exposure to PHI. We're not inclined to, shouldn't have to share any PHI data in terms of results per se. And we will assist with any of that results reporting and then leverage the test results template that we have here to help you author the final reports. A disclaimer there that although I have no intimate knowledge that this will actually be released by ONC, like they did last year, they may come up with a template for results reporting like they did with real world testing. That really came at the request of the EHR community. So as you have those opportunities to interact with your ONC ACB and interact with ONC directly, and if that's something that might prove helpful, ONC may do something along that line. Again, there's no promises. I have no current knowledge that they will do that. We have one over here that we're using with customers as we move forward. That leads us to, again, completing really the cycle in terms of test plan development. If you struggled last year and you looked at and you're starting to implement your test plan in your that's become a bit of a challenge. We can work with you to help you do that this year, but also leverage the expertise that we wrote a fair amount of real world test plans last year for both large and small EHR customer bases. And we can work with your team to come up with writing a real world test plan for this particular year as we go forward. And part of that, again, in-depth questionnaires, understanding your chapel listing, understanding all of your projects to get down to even the brass tacks about whether we're going to use summative type testing or more results orientated testing to tie everything together to that test plan that's due, again, for second year of real world testing by November of this year. So to sum up in brief, the real world testing offering that we have here is we're in the throes of client engagement now. We're working with current and new customers to look at the real world test plan that was submitted last year and help project plan the results gathering and preparation so that you have good data for the reports that need to be written at the end of this year. There's that relation, obviously, that the results that you're getting and how that's going to steer your next round of real world testing. So there's our test coordination service. We look also towards offering, beginning now, all the way through about Q3 into Q4 of this year, test results reporting. And again, coming full circle, starting to engage with some customers about, well, let's start fresh and write a real world test plan for 2023. So that's our real world testing engagement. Had some good success and testimonials from customers last year. Look forward to continuing that effort at current. The next big lift, obviously, is focused around the G10 Fire API patient population services. If you haven't, if you've started to see the writing on the wall, the current environment is the G10 standard for patient and population services, what is going to replace G8. And it has to be fully compliant and deployed and in your EHR ready for certification maintenance requirements by December 31st of this year. Do note, this is a criteria that has to be tested and has to be demonstrated. There is no attestation pathway for this. So the ONC ACB is already working with clients demonstrating this requirement and wrapping up their certification now through the end of November. So if you're under pressure to do that, there's a few incentives to do that. The ONC ACB, just to mention, is a 15% discount to your certification requirement testing fees if you complete testing by the end of Q2, 10% in Q3. Also, too, you're probably well aware of this. If you're not, this again is maybe where advisory services could help your team out. But you have a lot of other 2022 requirements going on. Again, that convergence of compliance. You've just wrapped up the biannual ONC attestation process, part 1. Second round is due in October. Have either done this or you're on a pathway fast track to deploying US CDI. And again, as a reminder, this is real world testing year 2. So you do have to entertain, again, implementing your real world test plan, setting up your results, and then writing a plan for next year. So therefore, what we do have from a G10 Advisory Services offering is 3 packages. You can contract for all 3. You can pick whatever fit you need. At a high level, I'll go over our getting started, desktop review, and Workbench review offerings to see if there might be a fit. Again, we do have customers that are working with our team right now in each one of these programs. So the getting started is if you're wondering, maybe your compliance team is not the same as it was a year or 2 ago. And when the Cures Act first came out and you thought you would get to this later, which is perfectly normal. We're seeing a lot of that right now. The point of the matter is if you're really struggling to answer the question, what do I need to pass testing? This might be applicable to a team that's not sure where to begin. You need an overview of the G10 certification requirements and expectations, including as it relates to info blocking. We have deliverables that include examining your readiness, walking you through the standards, expectations, and regulatory requirements, giving you an overview of what the test tool requirements are, and if need be, making some recommendations of whether we think you might have the wherewithal to build your own solution, or do you need a recommended list of the various developers out there that have a G10 bolt-on client that you might be able to use for your solution. So again, we have 1 or 2 folks that have gone through this particular program still available. You can appreciate the fact that given everything that's due by technically to the ONC by November, these G10 offerings are things you need to act pretty fast on. Desktop review, and again, this one here title-wise probably relates to those of you that understand agile development and Scrum Master requirements. The desktop review is as advertised. Getting into, you perhaps have some semblance of a working API, whether you built your own, you're going to bring one in. Maybe it needs to be updated to the new Fire v4 requirements. Maybe you've updated some of the requirements, but you're not sure about others as it might pertain to information blocking or how things may flow from a bolt-on to the responsibilities of the certified EHR. The package there includes reviewing, again, the requirements from an ONC perspective, relating and drawing parallels to the Fire v4 standard and the security requirements around that, how that must affect info blocking requirements. Again, making sure things aren't locked down too tight. The general conditions of maintenance of certification as it relates to the other fire-based criteria, reviewing the implementation guide or interpretations of the implementation guide and how it may relate to implementing the product in the field, and again, doing a gap analysis. So a traditional desktop review. The third portion, and again, separate, or you can combine all 3 if you like, is a Workbench review. Again, you have your API either under development or it's pretty much staged for testing, and you might need assistance with working with the test tool, reviewing results, and determining next steps. So that's what we do in a traditional Workbench review. So walk you through the test tool. There are 3 guided pre-test sessions, as well as consulting on the results and performing a gap analysis. So that's a lot different than the pre-testing sessions that you might have used Drummond services before, where that's pretty much standard. It's sort of like a pass or fail. And we look at the results and determine a pass or fail for you. And there's traditionally no advice with that. This is more advice-based consulting type engagement as you go through the testing. If you've had challenges with going through and testing and preparing for the G10 APM requirements, this might be a popular choice for. And it is something that we've seen a high level of demand for over the last couple of weeks. As you look at the G10 project lifecycle, a couple of ways you could look at it in terms of the getting started. That program typically, on average, accounts for 30 days of support. The desktop review, a lot more in-depth, get into that interactive guidance, looking at your project plans, looking at the implementation guide, setting you up for success to either finish coding and or implementing your Fire bolt-on. There could be an overlap with that of the Workbench review, having the availability of up to 3 sessions to have the Drummond team work with you to put your product through the paces of a test tool, and again, interpret the results and make some recommendations with a goal towards all of that, again, separate or combined, leading you to a full-fledged G10 compliance, and you're off and ready to go and fulfill the final stage of demonstrating your product and setting up a certification test date with the ONC Test Lab. All right, what I do want to do is, as a reminder, again, I'll talk about our the final offerings that we have within advisory services, but today in time, building on the success with the first one we offered was real world testing. Do you need help with plan authoring for this year? Do you need help taking a plan that maybe was written by other team members, or you've had to replace some staff and now you need to implement that test plan between now and the end of the year? Are things being going along pretty well, but you look towards, I needed assistance with a test plan. I may need some assistance writing and collecting all the final results to submit the results report and tying all that together. Those three offerings, three stages of real world testing are available today in time. The G10 requirements, do you need an overall getting started requirements review, or a more traditional desktop review and or Workbench review, or some semblance of those packages put together? I'll make a note here that, again, as alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, if you do interact with CMS, if you do have payer-based systems or reimbursement-based systems that interact with any of the CMS programs, then there are obligations to CMS's interoperability final rule, largely dedicated to any interactive or technology platforms that interact with the payer marketplace. We do have a Workbench review offering there. That does prepare you to onboard to a separate payer and patient access FHIR certification program, whereby you're able to certify your payer-based solution to the requirements of the CMS interoperability final rule. So those are the Karen implementation guides, as well as the ones that came out of the Da Vinci group. And interestingly enough, some of the G10 bulk data requirements have made their way into the ONC program. We're seeing a lot more of this is a tie over between ONC and CMS requirements as we look to what they're signaling from Health and Human Services going forward. Also, too, as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there is, if you need assistance with general compliance as it relates to ONC, you need assistance with attestation and report writing. The standard, I just need some pre-testing. I just need to run my system through the patients, through the process, and get a pass-fail acknowledgement and feedback from the Drummond group. We still offer that. Any of the assessments for preparing for ONC certification. I can say it was a pleasure being back at HIMSS this year and talking face-to-face with 3 or 4 vendors that are now new entrants into the ONC EHR environment and are starting from square one with certification, what they needed to do to prepare for that. So we look forward to working with those teams and anybody else that has any general compliance questions. Again, it's at this particular point too that, reminder, there's ONC ACB discounts for G10 testing. And moving along here and capping this off before we start to take a few questions and or answer any of the Q&A is, for more in-depth, if you want to schedule a one-on-one with our advisory services team here, recommend you do go to our advisory services homepage. If you do go to drummondgroup.com, you'll be able to click on right on that very front page, Drummond Advisory Services, and hit our landing page. For questions about either scheduling a more in-depth call or general questions as it relates to any of the advisory services that were mentioned today in the presentation, feel free to use that email address there. There are a number of team members that do get a direct email from that advisory services at drummondgroup.com. Always general inquiries, sales@drummondgroup.com. Inquiries about EHR penetration testing or PCI services, any of the other business units that are part of Drummond would welcome those inquiries as well. So Olga, what I'm going to do now is I will pause here to see if there is any questions that we might be able to answer as it relates to Drummond Advisory Services here. I will stipulate that from a ONC certification perspective, I'll steer all those questions to your normal support channels as it relates to Drummond customers going through the portal or contacting your certification representative directly. But I certainly am poised, along with 1 or 2 other panelists, to answer questions as it relates to advisory services. With that, I will pause.
Okay, John, we have a question from Hope Winkowski on real-world testing. Can you speak to the overall process Drummond will be using to engage customers, or will the developer engage customers in testing and issue the final report?
Let me review the question here. Overall process Drummond will be using to engage customers, or as a developer, will the developer engage customers in testing and issue the final report? Yeah, typically if I understand the question, the idea is that obviously the ultimate responsibility of Drummond is to be interacting with the developer itself. We would lean on a developer if they're going to be leveraging a real environment or a test shell or a training directory, the intimate and intricacies of performing real world testing. We do lean on the developer to do that. We would not project management, calling up customers or scheduling customer testing or anything like that. We do have plans, we do have outlines, we do have collateral that make recommendations about how to accomplish all of that, right down to the individual criteria, whether it should be a human actor or whether it should be a technology-based actor. So we can get into the weeds on that. But if I understand the question, we don't leverage or engage our EHR customers, end user community. What we don't have and don't envision having and have gotten through the first round of real world testing without is we will not be going down business associate agreements, that avenue, or any exposure to PHI. So hopefully that answered that question.
Thank you, Hope, for your question. If you have a follow-up, feel free to type it in the question and answer. We also have one here, John, regarding G10. There was a statement on the slide, deadline for ACB acceptance is the end of November. Can you expand on that? Does that mean we need to complete our live certification session by November 30th?
That is my understanding, yes.
Thank you. As far as any other questions, I think the best way to receive these is the Q&A section in this webinar. And if you'd like to get more questions or more answers, feel free to use the contact us emails listed here. We do have another one here. What happens? Let's see, sorry. What happens if we do not certify to all the criteria by the deadline?
Again, I'll largely defer to the ONC ACB side of that, but again, let me clarify too that it's my understanding that the testing for G10 up until December 15th is what I'm being told. So you do have a little bit of a window there. The earlier we can get them in, obviously, the better. As far as criteria testing, it all relates to your certification and maintenance of your certification requirements as your product is listed on the chapel. So should you miss a certification maintenance requirement, then that does open you up to having your chapel listing removed.
Okay, I have a question. Can you share where to find the test plan for G10 in the Drummond portal?
I'll defer, to be honest with you. I actually don't have access from the advisory services side to the Drummond customer portal. But hearing that question, I'll be ensured that the ONC ACB does follow up.
Thank you.
Assume something like that would be under the proctor section in the portal. I'm aware that, again, each account has an assigned proctor or an account manager, and they'd be able to engage directly there.
Okay, there were some other questions, and I believe they've been answered as well. If we can submit results as early as December 1st, Does that mean that test plans are approved by December 1st, just not posted until 12/15?
Yeah, again, I'll have to, from an advisory services side, we ensured all test plans were submitted by the ONC ACB date. Then it's up to the ONC ACB in terms of reviewing test plans and turning them around. It's not something we have control over, nor can I put a date on. A couple of questions to team in terms of pricing for any of these advisory services. There is a framework for that, but much like we did with real world testing, it does depend on the EHR, the number of modules, the number of different versions, and frankly, drilling down into your chapel listings. So that's why we'd encourage, if there is more interest, happy to have a one-on-one with you.
And then a new one, please provide the difference between a failure and a warning for certification purposes.
Again, I'll have to defer to the ONC ACB, not being a proctor by trade.
Thank you. Thank you for these questions. These are all great questions, and our Drummond Advisory Services team is separate from the Drummond ATL and ACB. So, but we will answer your questions and forward these to our—
Also too, is I'm pretty sure, I'm aware that the HCS certification team has a new webinar coming up over the next couple of weeks. So again, for Drummond customers, ensure you check the portal, as well as on the Drummond website proper. There is a resources page, and the resources always list upcoming webinars. So do stay tuned.
Another question just came in, John. If there are no changes in the application for the list of certification criteria, do we still need to submit the revised test plan this year?
Yes, the test plan is due every year.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll remain on for a few more minutes. Again, we typically schedule these things for about 30, 45 minutes to allow scheduled lunchtime where you transition or prepare for your next meeting. So again, we'll definitely stay online for another few minutes.
We have another one that just appeared. Can the same test plan be submitted again in this case?
In a general requirements perspective, the answer would be yes. Obviously, that you'd have to have new and current dates. And we are expecting to take into account the fact that ONC is still in the process of reviewing test plans that were submitted last year. They may come out with some sort of additional FAQ or guidance as it relates to what they want to see for the second year of real world test plans. So while common sense says that you could probably boilerplate a test plan that is working for next year, provided ONC doesn't mandate any wholesale changes.
Here's a question for you, John. Would these services be applicable to an EMR who is just starting the certification process?
Absolutely. Yes, that is interestingly enough, some of the newer EHR technology providers to the ONC certification world made up a fair portion of our real world testing client base last year. So again, general ONC compliance, getting ready for certifying your platform and getting started. All those services are available here, yes. So you don't have to be a long-term EHR to take advantage of these.
We also have another question on USCDI. There has been some question as to what version is required for compliance. Is it version 1 or version 2?
Again, without being in the throes of certifying, I would have to defer.
We will find an answer for you, Hope. Thank you for asking. And I mean, we will forward your question to the ACB for sure.
I'll take a quick look offline here, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure. Because I know V1 is the current version. V2 was hovering. ONC could approve that as part of the SVAP process this summer. So I would, having spent 20 plus years in the EHR world, as new versions would come through, we prepare and stage both. I know that's a big lift and it's easier said than done. Again, 20 plus years in the EHR role, but it's V1 now, so you can certify with that. Should V2 come out and be approved, you'd have to make some preparations for that.
Thank you. Do you by chance know the deadline to update to FHIR version 4?
December 31st.
And one question, what is the SVAP process?
That's the standard version advancement process as outlined in the Cures Act. It basically allows, ONC has made it allowable for EHR vendors to adopt new standards as part of, for instance, real world testing. So there's a lot less coming to the ONC ACB for formalized testing than there was in the past if you already have a certified platform. So that whole process is outlined in the Cures Act. For instance, migrating to a FHIR v4 version. You can do a lot of that updating and testing as part of your real world test plan. Obviously, ONC G10 notwithstanding, but that's what that stands for.
So if there are no other questions, thank you all for attending today. Let us know how Drummond Advisory Services may be there for you, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.